Hello, my name is Wendy Thomas, and I'm a member of the Huntington Area League of Women Voters and Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the Women's Suffrage Centennial Celebration, Driving for Democracy. Today, we celebrate the passage of the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which guarantees all American women the right to vote. The amendment, ratified on August 18th and certified by the U.S. Secretary of State on August 26, 1920, was not an easy accomplishment. It was the culmination of a long, hard-fought battle of women of various races and economic status, spanning over 70 years and 3 generations. Many Americans have forgotten or simply do not know of this struggle in history, and therefore neglect to relate its impact on the election process. Women's suffrage is an ongoing movement. While women of color were included in the 19th Amendment, it took the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 for it to be fully realized for women of color, particularly those in the South. In 2013, Shelby versus Holder stripped many of the protections guaranteed in the Voting Rights Act. Efforts to suppress the registration and turnout of voters continues, making this fight as urgent today as it was in 1920. Voting is our voice. It is our power. It is our constitutional right. So while we celebrate this Women's Equality Day, be enlightened, be encouraged, be empowered, and vote. Remember, West Virginia women vote, and your vote counts.
Greetings. I'm Jerry Gilbert, president of Marshall University, and I'm very pleased to be addressing you today. August 26, 2020 is a date of tremendous significance. Not only is it Women's Equality Day, but is also the day of the 100th anniversary of the certification of the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, guaranteeing the right of women to vote. Women achieved the right to vote in 1920 after a long-fought battle. Historians track the beginning of the U.S. movement back to 1848, when Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton organized the Seneca Falls Convention, and as a consequence of that meeting, issued the Declaration of Sentiments, calling for women to be granted full citizenship. The document, which set forth a list of grievances and included the first public call for women's access to the ballot, was modeled on the Declaration of Independence and is worthy of our attention still today as we deal both publicly and privately with the lingering impact of social, economic, cultural, and political sexism. This gathering today demonstrates our state's, our nation's, and our community's commitment to celebrating the past, present, and future struggles to more fully address these vital issues. Over the course of this past year, Marshall University has been collaborating with the League of Women Voters of the Huntington area, Delta Sigma Theta Sorority, and the Office of the Secretary of State of West Virginia to coordinate educational programs and commemorate the honoring of the Women's Suffrage Centennial. Marshall's programs have featured speakers of national prominence and have been accompanied by voter registration initiatives that reflect our commitment to do everything we can to increase voter turnout, not just for this upcoming election, but for all elections moving forward. The history of the women's suffrage movement in the United States is deeply inspiring. It was a struggle that unfolded over the course of 72 years. Marshall has been honored a number of occasions, and in February, we hosted the chair of the history department at Harvard, Dr. Evelyn Brooks Higginbotham, who delivered the annual Carter G. Woodson Lecture on the subject of African Americans and the vote. Professor Higginbotham's lecture, which you can view on Marshall's YouTube channel, reminded us that women's history and African American history are deeply intertwined. When women won the constitutional right to vote in 1920, the struggle for access to the ballot box did not end. In the South, black women soon found themselves turned away. In the civil rights struggle of the 20th century, black women drew upon the ideals and the strategies from the women's suffrage movement in their campaign to enfranchise the disenfranchised. The Voting Rights Act of 1965, in fact, was the long-awaited fruition of the 19th and the 15th Amendments. Knowing about the history of women's suffrage movement is vital to our democracy. The lessons we stand to learn can re-energize us to face the injustices we are confronting today. In Professor Higginbotham's words, we can draw on the history of the women's suffrage movement for lessons about the pursuit of equal justice and equal rights regardless of race, regardless of sex, and regardless of sexuality. We can also look to this history for lessons about perseverance in the wake of collective victories and collective defeats. The journey for the more perfect union continues, and I am proud to be witness to the progress, and I know that you all are as well. Thank you very much.
Good day to you. I'm Steve Williams. I'm the mayor of Huntington, and it's an honor for me to be able to come and share a few thoughts relating to the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage, where women secured the right to vote. I was watching recently a PBS documentary regarding women's suffrage, and I think one of the terms that was being used at the time is that women were being given the right to vote. Anybody who studies women's suffrage, and as a result of these series of videos, it's quite clear women weren't given anything. They fought for the right to vote and overcame monumental odds simply because it wasn't just the right to vote, this was a power play. Individuals who held the right to vote, the men, were holding that to themselves, and frankly, as the old saying goes, the hand that rocks the cradle controls the world. Well, that wasn't the case at the time, but that has been the case ever since. The world was turned upon end as it needed to be at the time. And what we have been able to see since that time is because women had the right to vote, women had the ability to then actively participate in the political process and in the policy-making process, we can see the effects that it's had on the world relating to international conflict and social justice. Clearly, what we're experiencing in 2020 points out that we still have an awfully long way to go. But there was a path that was created by women in pursuing women's suffrage, pursuing the right to vote, gave us all in 2020, in the 21st century and beyond, the ability to know that if given a voice, that voice not only can be heard, but it can move mountains. And so women throughout the ages over the past 100 years have worked to change the world. So we're saying congratulations, and more than anything else, what we have to do is accept into our hearts what that means. But more importantly than anything else today, in 2020, in the midst of our continued social strife, in the midst of public health crises, is that let's learn lessons that the women in 1920 and the years before learned. That we never give up, that we continue to stand arm in arm, and those arms don't have to be of one gender. Those arms don't have to be of one color. Those arms don't have to have a singular social background. We stand together as one. Happy 100th anniversary for women's suffrage. You've made us what we are today.
I wanted to be involved in this project because I am very passionate about learning history and growing from it, and I feel that being able to immerse myself in this role allowed me to put myself in Sojourner's shoes, which is an opportunity that I don't think that would have ever approached me at another time. The most interesting thing that I had learned, which shouldn't come as shocking, but often in my position today, I forget about what people have gone through in the not so distant past, was that she was an abolitionist. She was a slave for a good portion of her life, and she lost all of her children to the atrocity that was slavery. Well, children, where there is so much racket, there must be something out of kilter. I think, twixt the Negroes in the South and the women in the North all talking about rights, the white man's about to be in a fix real soon. And what's all this talk about? Well, that man thinks women ought to be helped into carriages and lifted over ditches and given the best place everywhere. Well, I've never been helped into a carriage or over a mud puddle or given any best place. And ain't I a woman? I have planted and plowed and gathered into barns, and no man could ever head me. And ain't I a woman? I can work just as hard and eat just as much as any man, if I can get it. And I can bear the lash too. And ain't I a woman? I have borne 13 children and seen most all of them sold off into slavery. And when I was crying of mother's grief, no one but Jesus heard me. And ain't I a woman? There's been talk about something in the head. Intellect is what they're calling it. And what does intellect have to do with Negro rights or women's rights? Well, if my glass holds but a pint and yours holds a quart, wouldn't you be awful mean to not give me my little half measure? And that man in the back, he says women can't have as many rights because Christ was not a woman. Well, I have one question. Where did your Christ come from? Where did your Christ come from? He came from God and a woman. Man had nothing to do with it. And if the first woman God ever created had enough strength to turn the whole world upside down, well, the women here together ought to be able to turn it right back up. And they're asking to do it. The men had better let them. Her speech, Ain't I a Woman, brought new ideas to people that may have never questioned their place in society. So I think that people should continue to read the speech, and it should be analyzed very closely, because I know that the more I read it, the more I found, and the parallels that I see in 2020, they're there.
Stop! We have to end this fighting and inequality! It's not
Yeah.
inequality, it's common sense.
No, no, all of you, listen up.
Who votes for woman's suffrage now will add new laurels to his brow. His children's children with holy fire will chant in praise of patriot sire. No warriors wreath of glory shed, a brighter luster o'er their head than he who battles selfish pride and votes with woman side by side. Oh, we'll do nothing wrong but sing you this song. The good time for woman is coming right along. We'll sing you this song. Help the chorus on. The good time coming, boys, hold it right along. This shall unfold his better part, delight the spirit, warm the heart. No jealous thought shall haunt his brain, and in its peace he shall regain an equal born be his bride. No holy joy shall be denied, as equal rights their mortal be, together journeying o'er life's sea. Oh, we'll do nothing wrong but sing you this song. The good time for woman is coming right along. We'll sing you this song. Help the chorus on. The good time's coming, boys, hold it right along. The first great photo close shall be, whose gilded locks on infamy the poor besotted wretch shall know, that woman shut the gate of woe. The light of truth shall shine again, and temperance on the
expect me to raise your child well, then I can vote well too. Do you not think I'm good enough to be their mother? Then I'm good enough to vote.
I cannot believe you're still going on about this.
Yeah, can we
It's
please
not
just
going
drop
to
it
happen.
already?
I can't believe you're still talking back to a woman.
Gosh.
Listen, believe a man do that.
Wait! Let her speak.
Each one of you has trusted your wife to raise strong and moral children who will one day be capable of making strong and moral decisions at the polls.
Now, if you believe your children can one day be trusted, how much more so than the women who taught them these beliefs?
Yes.
I don't know, guys. Maybe they have a point.
No man is greater than his mother. No man is half so good. No man is greater than the wife he loves. No lover guide him, whatever betide him. She's good enough to love you and adore you. She's good enough to bear your troubles for you. And if your tears were falling today, nobody else would kiss them away. She's good enough to fill your heart with kisses when you are lonesome and blue. She's good enough to be your baby's mother, and she's good enough to vote in you.
Okay. So if women go to vote, who's going to watch the house?
Or the kids.
And who's going to have dinner ready when we get home?
Yeah.
And our gardens will be full of weeds.
Guys, we got to put a stop to this before it gets out of hand. The butter will spoil standing long in the churn. The biscuit too cold and the oven will burn. The flies on the window of pantry and hall will hum and the web spiders go to and fro. The babies will squall as never before. The babies are pets and the darlings no more. The babies will squall with wide open throat when women dress up to go out and vote.
Who then in the gardens will dig and pull weeds and plant in the moon all the various seeds? Who will from the cabbage the early worm snatch and count old-hinged chickens as fast as they hatch?
The babies will squall as never before. The babies are pets and the darlings no more. The babies will squall with wide open throat when women dress up to go out and vote. The mice on the floor will dance night and day. The cat with the cream pitcher have the first way. And dust will the fresco the tables and chairs. And Laura's around going up and downstairs. The babies will squall as never before. The babies are pets and the darlings no more. The babies will squall with wide open throat when women dress up to go out and vote. Gather the berries all moist with the dew and place for ourselves a very choice few. Who'll meet us with smiles as we open the gate. When out with a friend we have had to stay late. The babies will squall as never before. The babies are pets and the darlings no more. The babies will squall with wide open throat when women dress up to go out and vote.
Maybe we should think about what they're saying.
No! How would you feel if a lady police officer tried to arrest you?
Or if you had to go to a lady doctor next time you were sick.
If they can't do a man's job, what makes them think they can vote like a man?
Excuse
Not
me?
like you do your job.
to vote again. You are only human. The Lord made you a woman. Oh, suffragette, sweet suffragette, don't you ever try to vote again. For you never can be a man. If a tall policeman had a warrant for you and asked you to call with her, say what would you do? You could not refuse her, you could not and yet just think of being rescued by a police suffragette. Please suffragette, with eyes of jet, the thinkers' theories are all in vain. Let upon your slummy sit skirts are more becoming. Please suffragette, with eyes of jet, the thinkers' theories are all in vain. For you never can be a man.
If you have a lady doctor examine your pulse to see if you're improving or really getting worse, lay your hand on your breast, feel your heart beat and sigh. Say no man with such surroundings would well afford to die.
Sweet suffragette, I love you yet, and when I'm sick and in great pain, you can be my doctor, and doctor me with kisses. Sweet suffragette, I love you yet, and when I'm sick and in great pain, then you never can be a man.
They tell me you're a suffragette, and now if that is true, let's start a campaign of our own. I'll tell you are free, yet half denied. The right to vote on either side, for which our fathers fought and died. So sisters in this blessed land, come join with us, a suffragist band. So sisters in this blessed land, come join with us, a suffragist band. Then hail the day when we'll be free from nothing less than tyranny. Our cause of justice soon must win, though we are called to masquerade. When freedom's liberties come forth, we'll meet our brothers at the polls. So sisters in this blessed land, come join with us, a suffragist band. So sisters in this blessed land, come join with us, the suffragist band. Your newborn glory decks the skies, but flag and fruit to bless our eyes. 'Tis women's freedom blots out night, at clarion call of civic rights. Awake, arise, awake, arise. Long, long the night and steep the way, but now the dawn brings day. With pressure in each heart the dwell, with peace on earth and earth fail. With strength and mortal faith doth dwell, in home and city vale and dell. Awake, arise, who do deserve the work of reign. Since glorious dawn, peace rings the
But love them, we love them, whatever they do, from the rim of the hat to the tip of the shoe. And when they go out with a hullabaloo, we'll stay with the babies and play peekaboo. And no more the squall as never before. The babies, the pets, and the darlings evermore will not get too strong with wide open throats when women dress up to go out and vote.
I wanted to do Alice Paul because I had never heard of her before I started taking history classes at Marshall. And she encapsulates what it means to be willing to give up some of your rights in order to secure rights for other people. She was put into prison and force-fed, and she never complained about it. She took action by telling newspapers what had happened to her and saying, look at what they're doing to people who are demanding their rights. And she was the first person who I had learned about that I resonated with about how passionate she was about this one thing, and about justice, and about holding the government accountable for doing the things they said they were going to do. And I think that it was really inspiring that she was just willing to break the rules and to use the system and how it's flawed in order to succeed in her mission. In this speech, there are a couple of things that I really like about it. There's the part where she talks about how they're a nonpartisan organization, how these women who, on all of the other issues going on at the time, would not agree, but that they were able to come together and throw aside their differences, which I think is something that sometimes we can't do now, and to just fight together because they know that this is important, and more change can be made to help their other agendas later once women can vote. And I think the other thing that I really like about it is that she's talking to the Judiciary Committee at this point. And the line that says, I'm just asking you to do what you can do. Like, I'm just asking you to do your job and to really look at the Constitution and stop thinking about what you've always perceived it to mean and what it does, and to say, look at the opportunities that it also holds for the rest of the citizens. Times have changed. Our Constitution is still good, but it can be more inclusive than we're allowing it to be right now. We have come here to ask just one simple thing: that this Judiciary Committee refer the Susan B. Anthony Amendment to the House of Representatives. We are simply asking you to do the thing that you can do. I do not think that we have to discuss particularly whether suffrage is right or wrong, though we have had speakers here to show that it is a good thing. All we ask of you is that you let the House of Representatives decide this question. And we have brought people here from all over the United States to show the desire of women that this should be done. I just want to say one more thing: that we are an absolutely nonpartisan organization made up of women who are strong Republicans, women who are strong Democrats, women who are socialists and progressives, every type of woman. And we are united on this one thing: that suffrage be put above all other questions, irrespective of how it helps or hurts our own political party. In every election, if we have to go into any further elections, we pledge ourselves to this: that suffrage, that we will work just for suffrage, and for men or against men, according to the position they take on this national suffrage amendment. When we found every single day in May, when we went to the Rules Committee, until the close of Congress, that we were met with this same statement, that the Democrats had decided in caucus that suffrage should not be brought up in the House. And when we found that we were unable to do anything with argument or persuasion, we said, we will go to the women voters in the West, and we will tell them how we are blocked in Washington, and we will ask them to use their vote for their highest purpose possible. That is to win suffrage for the women of the nation. And we went into the district of every single man running for Congress on the Democratic ticket. 43 men. And we campaigned against every single one of those 43 men to the best of our ability, and only 19 came back. And when we came back to Washington and went again to the Rules Committee, instead of being told by Mr. Henry about the Democratic caucus, we were told that they had no greater desire in this world than to bring suffrage up. They told us that we had thoroughly misunderstood them, and that they were merely waiting for the best opportunity possible to bring this measure up. When we went to each Democratic member, and each one of them said the same thing, and that first week, they vowed to bring suffrage up for the first time in history. And when that measure came to a vote, each one of those men who we had campaigned against and who were still in Congress voted for us. And a large number of them spoke for us. I watched Iron-Jawed Angels a couple times, honestly. I read more about her and how people perceived her and how her friends perceived her. I read the article about whenever she came out about being force-fed in the prisons. I read about the stuff that she did after we got suffrage. She did the Equal Rights Amendment. She wrote the Equal Rights Amendment, and she kept fighting for other people's rights afterwards. And I looked up how to do hair like she did. I looked at a bunch of pictures of her. I tried to see what kind of facial expressions she made, and I just really tried to figure out the weight of this speech and of everything that's going on, because it was her mission. It's relevant today because it's important to see how at every step of our country's history, people have had to fight for their rights, for the right to vote, whether it be Black people and then women, and we're still seeing issues today about it, and to not take that duty lightly and to just not do it. And I think it's also important because there are some things that we have to set aside our differences for, put aside party lines and say, no, this is what has to happen. These are the things that are important today. And to just remember that whenever things seem really bad in this moment, to remember that people have been fighting for a century now, and that the fight never stops, but we keep moving forward.
Hello. My name is Montserrat Miller, and I'm the Executive Director of the John D. Verdrinko Academy for American Political Institutions and Civic Culture at Marshall University. I'm very pleased to be working on behalf of Marshall with the League of Women Voters, Delta Sigma Theta Sorority, and the City of Huntington, West Virginia, to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. I've been asked today, on behalf of our sponsors, to offer a toast to tenacity in recognition of the achievement of the bold, intelligent, determined women who worked for more than 7 decades to secure constitutional protection of women's right to vote in the United States. May we all be inspired by their tenacity.